Hello, my name is Charles. I was recently browsing eBay and came across this size 6 pocket watch movement and figured it would be a perfect candidate to be one of my wristwatch to pocket watch conversions. It will make a 40mm wristwatch. As you can see, this movement is jeweled to the center, which is very rare in the size 6 movements. It's in good condition, it's never been abused by previous watchmakers. Most of the screws aren't rounded out. It's in generally good shape, just dirty and been sitting in a drawer for probably 50 plus years. It's also got gold screws, which is very rare in a size 6. It's got a broken screw here, has a wrong screw here. And this screw looks like it's seen better days. We'll replate that one while we're replating the ones that are incorrect. Turning the movement over, dial's got cracks and it's missing the hands. I have replacements for those. If you look up the serial number, it will tell us it was made in the year 1900. The balance staff is broken. That appears to be the only broken part on the entire movement. And here's a quick preview of what we'll end up with. This is the movement once it's been cased and ready to wear. I hadn't noticed it at first, but the balance stud screw had also been replaced at some point. The disassembly of this movement was pretty straightforward, so I'll pretty much just let you watch as I tell you a little bit about why I make these conversions, what's special about them, and some history on the Waltham Watch Company. The serial number there matches the one on the movement. So back in the year 1900 when this was made, it was cased in a ladies' pocket watch movement or smaller movement. Could have also been called a lapel watch at that time. Being that pocket watches have fallen out of fashion, these movements get pulled from their cases and the cases get scrapped for their gold or silver, whatever precious metal they had in them. And the refineries sell these movements as scrap. And I feel it's a real shame, being that they're beautiful movements, made just as well as any movement made in Switzerland back in the day, and probably just about as well made as most movements are today. I like to convert these to be wristwatches because they're the perfect size to fit into a 40mm case, which is now a very good sized watch. All through the 1900s, wristwatches were smaller, probably 28 to 32, maybe 34mm for a standard. Being that watches are now larger, it gives me the opportunity to save these movements and give them a second use. There's a lot of rich history that goes along with Waltham and all American-made pocket watch movements from the late 1800s and early 1900s. Back in the day, the United States was the industry leader in watchmaking. In the mid-1850s, Waltham opened their plant in Waltham, Massachusetts, along the Charles River. Waltham employed the latest technology to make machines that could mass produce parts that previously were only handmade. Being able to mass produce parts and make them interchangeable from one movement to the next was a huge advantage in the watch industry. Previously, every part had to be fitted to the movement it would be installed in, and parts were not interchangeable between movements without modifications. In the nearly 100 years that the Waltham Watch Company was open, they made over 40 million watches. This particular movement is a model of 1890 Waltham size 6 movement. Over 1 million size 6 movements were made by the Waltham Watch Company. The vast majority of them were either 7 or 15 jewel movements. I believe that this one was a very special movement when I saw it on eBay because it had the jewel on the center wheel, which typically is only found on 16 and 17 jewel movements, which made this a very rare watch. I was very surprised to find out when I took the dial off this that there were no jewels on the dial side of the movement. Waltham was a little bit tricky here by showing us all the jewels on the visible side, leading us to believe that the movement has more jewels than it actually has. I've personally serviced hundreds of these movements and have seen this on a few of the 11 jewel movements, but never on one jewel to the center with gold screws like this one. So even though this movement isn't what I thought it was, it's still a very nice movement and looks beautiful when cased in a observation back watch case. So I'm going to go ahead and service it up and offer it up for sale. If you're interested in purchasing a watch like this one, please see the description below and follow the link there to my eBay listings. Now that we have the movement apart, let's take a look at this broken balance staff. So as you can see, the pivot on the bottom, which is now on the top, is shorter than the other pivot. That pivot's been broken off, which is what's allowing the balance to flop around in the movement. We're going to need to replace the staff on this balance wheel. We'll start by putting it in a staking block here and gently removing the hairspring. I'm marking the location of the stud on the hairspring so we can put it back in the same place when we're done, which will pretty much leave the balance in beat, but we'll probably have to true that up a little bit afterward. Again, I'll mark the location of the roller jewel so that we can put the balance in beat, and these Sharpie marks will wash right off in the ultrasonic cleaner when it's washing. So now we'll remove the roller table. This camera I'm using does not have a microphone, so you'll have to imagine the noise is not. It just takes a quick tap to knock that roller table off. That was it. Now we will drive the balance staff out of the balance. The balance staff is riveted in, so the balance needs to be well supported so it doesn't get bent out of flat when you're doing this. I tapped it a couple of times there and probably should have tapped it one more time to drive it the rest of the way out, but I figured instead of getting rough with it, I would just manually pull it out. And that's the balance staff removed. And so this is the new balance staff going in. I'm going to start with a rounded punch, which will open up the rivet on that new staff and fix it in place. I'll tap it and rotate and tap it and rotate a few times to make sure pressure gets applied from every angle. Now the balance staff is fixed in place, but we'll use a flat punch to flatten that rivet out a little bit more. Twisting it a couple times again. And now we're going to drive on the roller table, which has the roller jewel sticking out of it, which means we need to use a special punch that has a slit which interacts with that roller jewel and allows us to push on the metal without pushing on that ruby jewel that would shatter if it were hit. And again, I've lined that roller jewel up with my Sharpie mark. Make sure we get this back in beat. Now I'm going to flip over that same stake and use it again. This time as an anvil so that we can slide on the hairspring. And luckily, I just got the hairspring on before the video of this got corrupted. You'll see in a second that we get some corruption on the screen and we lose it, but that was the last of the balance staff installation. Here's the old staff above the new staff. You can see the longer pivot and the size of them compared to a typical match. So I've replaced the missing and incorrect screws with screws from genuine Waltham size 6 movements, but like I had said before, gold plated ones are very rare. so I'm going to need to gold plate these to match. I tried not to over polish them so that the end result would be a nice match with the existing gold plated screws in the movement. On this movement I'm going for more of a conservation than I am a restoration. So the gold plating process starts with a 30-second electro clean and then a rinse in distilled water. After rinsing in distilled water, the parts will be nickel plated. The nickel plating is done to give the gold a good surface to adhere to. The nickel plating is a 20-minute process done at 2 volts of current, which we'll fast forward through here. And here you'll see the gold solution coming back from the microwave where it was heated to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. And now we'll rinse off the nickel solution and the anode and set it up for gold plating. The gold plating only takes about 30 seconds at 4 volts, which we'll fast forward through a little bit here. And again, rinse it in the water. And this is the result. It's about what I was going for. They still came out a little bit better than the existing screws, but they're a good match. And these are all the parts laid out before reassembling after cleaning them in the watch cleaning machine. Here I'm going to install the new white alloy mainspring. This is one of the few areas that the technology has improved since the 1890s. White alloy mainsprings hold their shape better and tend to give a better amplitude for a longer period of time. They're less prone to breaking. Also, I'll be using all modern synthetic lubricants, which are better in quality than the original lubricants, meaning that these movements probably run better than they did when they were new once I'm done with them. And by the way, they pretty much run as well as any modern movements do. So here we're installing the balance pivot jewel and its cap jewel in the main plate. The only jewels on the main plate for this movement, unfortunately. Again, I'm kind of disappointed in Waltham for not jeweling the escape wheel and the seconds wheel and the rest of them. So the oil you see going on there is HP 1300. On these movements, which have a very heavy mainspring, I use 1300 on all the train wheels and everything except for the escapement and balance. Basically, you'll get grease on anything that interacts with the winding mechanism. 1300 on everything else except for the escapement and balance, which is going to be Mobius 9010. These movements really are made very well, even considering they were made back in the 1890s, when I'm not even sure if the Waltham Watch Company had electricity. I know that electricity came into Boston around 1890, and Waltham is outside of Boston. They probably had their own generators on site for a while before that, but it's incredible what they could accomplish back in these days. And that's that side of the movement. So let's flip it over here. And get to work on the keyless works. The keyless works in this movement is very fiddly compared to modern movements. This would have been a very early implementation of keyless winding and setting. Not long before this movement was made, you would have used a key to wind and set your pocket watch, pretty much like a clock. So this doesn't look much like a modern watch in the keyless works area, but it works just the same. You'll see lots of this blue grease being used, which is 9501 Mobius synthetic grease. Occasionally you'll see me working below the view of the camera down on the bottom side of the screen. I'm working under a trinocular microscope, but the camera eye, the third eye of the trinocular, doesn't exactly have the same view that I have when I'm looking through the stereo microscope. And here we'll slide in the spring, which will be finally the last of the fiddly work in the keyless works area. And this is one of the screws that we replated. Here I'm going to inject some Mobius 9010 through the jewel up against the capstone. Here we will fit the balance to the cock and then install it without the rest of the train in place so that we can observe it in motion and make sure everything is true and flat. So here, it's a little bit hard to see, but I'm showing you the location of the impulse jewel in relation to the pivots for the escape wheel and the pallet fork. If you draw a straight line through the escape wheel pivot and the pallet fork pivot, the impulse jewel should be straight in line with them. And here you can just make out the jewel to the left of the line, which means for all we tried with our Sharpie marks to get this in beat, we're going to need to rotate the hairspring just a little bit to bring that impulse jewel into place. Now you can see that impulse jewel is dead center between the banking pins and straight in line with the escapement. In shake is good. And here I've taken the movement away to check the balance and make sure it's flat and level, as is the hairspring. And they are. This is HP 1300 on the click. Being sure to get the pivots and all the gears lined up so that the train bridge goes on easily. These older Walthams don't tend to hold together without putting pressure down on them. Modern movements, the pins are about the same size as the holes that they go into, and by pushing the plate down against the main plate they stick, but these need to be held while you put the first screws in. Otherwise the plate can come away and you can break a pivot or a jewel. This is the ratchet wheel, which on this movement happens to be upside down compared to typically where you would find it on a modern watch. Our mainspring and its barrel. And the mainspring bridge. Now we can wind up the movement and check to make sure all the train is free. Here we're using HP 1300. Mobius 9010. That's a pallet fork going in. And again, I didn't realize I was off the bottom of the screen here. And here I use Mobius 9415, which typically is only used on higher beat rate movements. It's a grease instead of an oil. Most 1800 beat rate movements like this one would use Mobius 941, but these pocket watch movements are so big and heavy that I find the grease stays in place better, lasts longer, and doesn't affect the amplitude. And now we'll put in the balance and see if this wants to come to life for the first time in the past 50 years. Now let's give it a full wind. Finish lubricating the dial side. And here I have a replacement dial that's identical in every way to the original, pulled from a movement from the same time period, along with its handset. And here, again, off the bottom of the screen, I'm greasing the stem. And these movements are a perfect fit in this case. No case ring needed. And these hands were in really good shape, so they weren't re-blued. Many times these will be pretty rusty. I'll have to polish them and blue them, which makes them turn out really nice. But here again, I'm trying to do conservation work on this movement, not restoration. Keep it as original as possible. And here we'll put the movement on the timing machine and see how it's running. And here you can see we have a great amplitude of low 290s, the beat error of 1.1. And these cases are water resistant. I test them all to 3 bar. The watch is suspended above the water, pressurized, held there for 2 minutes, then lowered into the water. And if any pressure got into the case, the pressure inside the case will be greater than the pressure underneath the water, and you'll see water bubbles streaming out from the spot where it's leaking. No leaks on this one, so it's ready to go. I use these Straps co-brand straps, which I like. They're good quality for a good price, and they have quick change bars, so if you wanted to have multiple bands, you can change them just like you're watching right now and have them in all different colors. It winds and sets just like a typical modern watch. I use sapphire crystals both on the front and the back of these watches. Again, I sell these watches on eBay and directly to my clients. So if you're interested in one, check out the links in the description below. And this is the end result. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. It helps with the algorithm more than you know. And thank you for watching to the end.